Hello and welcome to Penguin Classics On Air. This is Elda Rotor, Editorial Director of Penguin Classics. For part of today's program, we'll talk about Eclipse, the third book in the wildly popular Twilight series by Stephenie Meyer, which some have called Wuthering Heights with Vampires. Twilight fans know that Bella Swan is a friend of the classics. In Eclipse, Bella relates her love for vampire Edward Cullen to that of Cathy's for Heathcliff in Bronte's Wuthering Heights. With me today is Donna Freitas. Donna is an assistant professor of religion at Boston University. A Twilight expert and Dracula fan, Donna lectures and blogs on pop culture and spirituality, and is a regular BeliefNet contributor. She is the author of Sex and the Soul, Juggling Sexuality, Spirituality, Romance, and Religion on America's College Campuses, Killing the Imposter God, Philip Pullman's Spiritual Imagination in His Dark Materials, and a critically acclaimed young adult novel, The Possibilities of Sainthood. She lives in New York City. So I wanted to talk about Eclipse, particularly Stephenie Meyer's third volume in the Twilight Saga, and the connection between Eclipse and Wuthering Heights. So there are love triangles in each book. In Eclipse and the Twilight series, we have Edward, Bella, and Jacob. And in Wuthering Heights, there is Heathcliff, Cathy, and Edward. What's the appeal of each love triangle for readers, and how do they overlap?
There are several other things, I think, that appeal about the love triangle in the sense that it provides for drama and tragedy, because someone is obviously not going to get the girl. But in particular, I think one of the biggest things that Wuthering Heights and Twilight have in common is the love triangle, because love triangles are ultimately destructive in some way. It's painful for everyone involved. And I think in many ways, Wuthering Heights, the relationships themselves are very destructive of these two different families. And Stephenie Meyer is endeavoring to really evoke the drama of the love triangle in the Twilight series, but at the same time keep it redemptive in some way, because I don't think she wants people to feel too much pain for either Jacob or Edward.
And let's talk about Heathcliff. Curious to know if you think that Heathcliff is the prototype for Edward.
In some ways, I think Edward is the anti-Heathcliff. What they have in common is the fact that they're both demonic. And what's ironic in many ways is that Heathcliff is actually a human who acts like a demon, and he does all throughout the book. And so he never quite finds his humanity, except in Catherine, and even there, he's want for his humanity. Whereas Edward is an actual demon. He's a vampire, and he's yearning to be as human as possible. And so in many ways, the demonic aspect is what they share, but they start from different points and then they go in different directions. In some ways, I feel like Edward is the redemption of Heathcliff, or in many ways, I think what's going on in Twilight, if you compare it to Wuthering Heights, is a kind of redemption of that story. Because essentially you have Edward, who rather than being turned into a demon because he's so in love with Bella, it's actually what ends up saving him, or it's what gives him back his soul, whereas Heathcliff ends up pretty soulless.
There's a blog called Bella's Bookshelf that talks about all the classic literature that Bella reads through the Twilight series, and I'm halfway done with this series now in Eclipse. And one of the characteristics so far that I've noted about Bella is that she's a great student. She does her homework, she gets good grades, she's an avid classics reader. And I was thinking about other classics that Bella reads through the saga, and what would you recommend that might give Twilight fans a deeper understanding of the series?
Romeo and Juliet would be the obvious one, but I think Pride and Prejudice would be maybe not the first one you'd go to, but in some ways, I think Edward comes about as close to Darcy for teen girls and lots of non-teen girls as any other hero has. He's the contemporary vampire, Mr. Darcy.
Some describe Twilight as Wuthering Heights with vampires, and I've seen an academic paper analyzing the vampire archetype in the Bronte sisters' works, Wuthering Heights and Jane Eyre. Where do you see these connections, and why are Bronte novels and Stephenie Meyer's Twilight Saga a natural fit?
Well, there's the Gothic dimension of their settings. The Twilight series takes place in Forks, Washington, which is where it's perpetually raining. and dark and gloomy, and you have, this family of vampires that lives out in the woods, and there are these wonderful settings in which, Edward and Bella can easily, go off to the mountains or to these beautiful clearings, the meadow. But I think in Wuthering Heights, you have it takes place on the moors, and there's snow, and there's something about the darkness of the weather and the fact that they're, in many ways, the families they're at the whim of, I think, the landscape. And so I think that's one of the common aspects between the two books that really adds a mood to both of them. I think the other parallel is just that you have two different families, but essentially they're at the mercy of this love between Edward and Bella, and then, in Wuthering Heights between Catherine and Heathcliff. And in Wuthering Heights, the love between Catherine and Heathcliff is incredibly destructive to both the families. And that's one of the themes that keeps coming up throughout the Twilight books and also in Eclipse.
Perennial classic appeal, the star-crossed lovers.